The courtroom in downtown Chicago's Federal Building hums with a tense, electric silence. Harsh fluorescent lights cast stark white beams across the polished mahogany benches, illuminating rows of spectators who sit rigid, their eyes fixed. On the defendant's table,
the air feels heavy, charged with anticipation, as if the room itself holds its breath.
At the center of it all stands Emily Harper, the accused, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her posture straight but, her face unreadable. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, adjusts her glasses and bangs the gavel once, the sharp sound slicing through the stillness. "Order," Judge Clara Monroe declares, her voice steady but commanding. "The court will now hear the case of the state of Illinois versus Emily Harper." The prosecutor, a wiry man named Daniel Voss, rises from his seat, his tailored suit crisp against the muted tones of the courtroom. He buttons his jacket with a deliberate motion, his eyes scanning the jury before settling on Emily. The jurors, a mix of men and women from across the city, shift slightly in their seats, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and judgment. Voss clears his throat, his voice smooth but laced with accusation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he begins, "today you will hear evidence of a crime so calculated, so chilling, that it will leave no doubt of the defendant's guilt. Emily Harper, a woman who hid behind a mask of respectability, stands accused of murder in the first degree." Whispers rippled through the gallery, quickly silenced by a glance from Judge Monroe. Emily's lawyer, Rachel Nugent, sits beside her, her pen poised over a legal pad, her expression calm but alert. She leans toward Emily, whispering something inaudible, but Emily doesn't respond. Her gaze remains fixed on a point somewhere beyond the prosecutor, her jaw set, her lips pressed into a thin line. The weight of every stare in the room seems to press against her, yet she doesn't flinch. Voss paces slowly before the jury, his hands clasped behind his back. On the night of June 12, 2024, in a quiet apartment in Lincoln Park, a life was taken. A single act of violence shattered the illusion of safety. The evidence will show that Emily Harper, with premeditation and malice, ended the life of Catherine Wells. The name hangs in the air, and a woman in the front row of the gallery, a relative of the victim, perhaps stifles a sob. Emily's fingers tighten around each other, the only sign of movement from her. The prosecutor pauses, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. He gestures toward a table covered with evidence bags, each one meticulously labeled, a silent promise of the case he's about to unfold. Rachel Nugent adjusts her glasses, her eyes narrowing as she watches Voss. She scribbles a quick note, her movements precise, betraying nothing of the storm brewing in the courtroom. The spectators lean forward, their attention split between the prosecutor's measured words and Emily's stoic presence. A journalist in the back row types furiously. On a tablet, the soft clicks barely audible. Judge Monroe's voice cuts through again. "Mr. Voss, you may proceed with your opening statement." Voss nods, turning to face the jury fully. "The state will prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Emily Harper planned and executed this crime. You will see forensic evidence here, witness testimony, and uncover the truth of what happened that night. This is not a case of accident or passion. This was called deliberate murder." As he speaks, the courtroom's fluorescent lights seem to grow harsher, casting long shadows behind Emily. She remains still, her face a mask of composure, but the air around her feels charged, as if something unspoken waits to break free. The jury watches her, searching for a crack in her demeanor, but she gives them nothing. Not yet. The courtroom's hum fades as the focus narrows to Emily Harper, seated at the defendant's table. Her face, pale under the relentless fluorescent glare, betrays nothing at first glance. But the camera lingers, zooming in until her eyes fill, the frame dark, shadowed, and heavy with exhaustion. They're not the eyes of someone defeated, though. There's a flicker beneath the surface, a guarded secret glinting like a shard of glass in deep water. Her gaze doesn't waver, fixed on some invisible point beyond the judge's bench, as if she's seeing something no one else can. The prosecutor's voice, still droning through his opening statement, becomes a distant murmur. Calculated. Planned in cold blood. The words slide past Emily, barely touching her. Her eyelids are heavy, dark circles etched beneath them, hinting at sleepless nights, yet there's a defiance in the set of her jaw, a silent refusal to bend under the weight of the accusations. Her eyes, though tired, burn with something unspoken anger, perhaps, or resolve. A strand of dark hair falls across her cheek, and she doesn't bother to brush it away. Her hands remain folded in her lap, fingers laced so tightly the knuckles are white. The camera catches a faint tremor in her left hand. A momentary crack in her composure, gone as quickly as it appeared. The jury watches her, some leaning forward, others scribbling notes, trying to decipher the enigma in her stare. Is it guilt? Fear? Or something else entirely? Rachel Nguyen, her lawyer, glances sideways at her, her own expression, unreadable but alert. She jots something on her legal pad, her pen moving swiftly, as if capturing a thought sparked by Emily's silence. The gallery behind them shifts, a low rustle of fabric and hushed whispers, but Emily doesn't turn. Her eyes remain locked. Forward, cold as steel, yet brimming with a secret that seems to pulse in the air around her. The camera pulls back slightly, revealing the stark contrast between Emily's stillness and the restless energy of the courtroom. The prosecutor's voice rises, punctuating the air with accusations, but Emily's gaze doesn't flicker. It's as if she's somewhere else, her mind replaying a moment no one else in the room can see. The weight of her secret hangs heavy, a silent promise that the truth is far more complex than the story being told. The courtroom fades into darkness, the hum of voices dissolving as the scene shifts to a dimly lit apartment in Lincoln Park, Chicago. It's late, the kind of late where the city outside feels like a distant memory. The camera pans across a cramped living room, its walls adorned with faded art prints and a single flickering lamp casting long, jagged shadows. The air is thick with tension, the silence broken only by the faint hum of a refrigerator in the next room. A clock on the wall ticks past 11:47 p.m., its hands glowing faintly in the gloom. Catherine Wells stands near the center of the room, her silhouette sharp against the muted light. She's in her early 30s, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, a glass of red wine trembling in her hand. Her face is flushed, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. She's arguing, her voice low but edged with desperation. "You can't keep doing this," she says, her words clipped, directed at someone just out of frame. The camera doesn't show who it is not, yet. Her free hand gestures wildly, the wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of the glass. The room feels alive with menace, every shadow a potential threat. A coffee table nearby holds a scattering of papers, a half-empty bottle of wine, and a single overturned photo frame, its glass cracked. The camera lingers on the frame for a moment, the faces in the photo obscured, a deliberate mystery. Catherine takes a step back, her heel catching on the edge of a rug, and she stumbles slightly, steadying herself against the arm of a worn leather couch. "You don't understand," a voice replies, low and strained, coming from the unseen figure. It's impossible to tell if it's male or female, the words distorted by the weight of emotion. The camera shifts, catching the glint of something metallic on the fluorinite, its blade catching the lamp's weak light. Catherine's eyes dart toward it, her breath hitching. She sets the wine glass down on the table with a clink, her movements slow, deliberate, as if she's trying not to provoke. The tension snaps like a taut wire. Catherine lunges forward, not for the knife, but toward the unseen figure, her hands outstretched as if to push or plead. There's a scuffle, a blur of motion too fast for the camera to fully capture. A sharp gasp, a muffled cry, and then Catherine stumbles backward, her hands clutching at her chest. The camera zooms in as she collapses, her body hitting the tiled floor with a sickening thud. Blood seeps from beneath her, spreading across the pale ceramic tiles, the crimson stark against the cold surface. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stare up at the ceiling as the light in them fades. The camera pulls back, revealing the room in its entirety, now chaotic, overturned furniture, a shattered wine glass, and the blood pooling wider, creeping toward the edge of the rug. The knife lies abandoned a few feet away, its blade now stained. The unseen figure's shadow looms briefly in the frame, moving quickly toward the door, their footsteps heavy but hurried. The door creaks open, letting in a sliver of light from the hallway, then slams shut, leaving the apartment in near darkness. The scene lingers on Catherine's still form, the blood now a dark mirror reflecting the flickering lamp. The clock ticks on, now reading 11:49 p.m. The silence is deafening, broken only by the distant wail of a siren somewhere in the city. The camera pans upward, focusing on a small security camera tucked in the corner of the ceiling, its red light blinking steadily, a silent witness to the violence below. The scene fades to black, the image of Catherine's lifeless body imprinted. In the viewer's mind, the questions piling up like the shadows in that small, suffocating room. Who was the figure? Why the knife? And what did Catherine mean by "you can't keep doing this"? The truth feels close, yet maddeningly out of reach. The Chicago courtroom snaps back into focus, the stark fluorescent lights casting a clinical glow over the polished wood and tense faces. The hum of anticipation fills the air as all eyes turn to the witness stand, where a young man, Michael Torres, stands gripping the edge of the wooden railing. His hands tremble slightly, betraying the nervous energy coursing through him. The spotlight above the stand bathes his face in a harsh white beam, highlighting the sheen of sweat on his forehead and the rapid darting of his eyes. Michael, in his late 20s, wears a rumpled button-up shirt, the collar slightly askew, as if he dressed in a hurry. His dark hair is mussed, and his jaw clenches as he tries to steady his breathing. Prosecutor Daniel Voss approaches the stand, his steps measured, his expression one of practiced calm. He holds a clipboard, glancing at it briefly before fixing his gaze on Michael. "Mr. Torres Voss," begins, his voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "Please state your relationship to the victim, Catherine Wells." Michael swallows, hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I was her neighbor," he says, his voice cracking slightly. He clears his throat, glancing toward the jury, then quickly away. "We lived in the same building in Lincoln Park. Apartment 3B, right across from hers." The jury leans forward, their notebooks open, pens poised. Emily Harper, seated at the defendant's table, watches Michael with that same unreadable gaze, her eyes still cold but sharp, as if searching for something in his words. Her lawyer, Rachel Nguyen, sits beside her, her pen moving swiftly across her legal pad, her face a mask of focus. Voss nods, pacing slowly before the stand. "And on the night of June 12, 2024, did you see or hear anything unusual in Ms. Wells' apartment?" Michael's fingers tighten on the railing, his knuckles paling. "Yeah," he says, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. "I heard shouting. It was late, maybe around 11:30 p.m. I was in my living room, and the walls in that building are thin. I heard Catherine's voice, loud, like she was arguing with someone. The courtroom is silent, the spectators hanging on every word. A woman in the gallery adjusts her glasses, her eyes narrowing as she listens. Voss stops pacing, turning to face Michael fully. "Can you describe what you heard?" "Be specific, Mr. Torres." Michael shifts his weight, his eyes flicking toward Emily for a split second before returning to Voss. "It was intense." Catherine was saying things like, "You can't do this to me, and I won't let you." She sounded scared but also angry. "You know?" Then I heard another voice, lower, but I couldn't make out the words. It was muffled, like they were trying to keep it down. Voss raises an eyebrow, his tone sharpening. "And did you recognize this other voice?" Michael hesitates, his lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. The spotlight seems to burn brighter, the light catching the beads of sweat rolling down his temple. I'm not sure," he says finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It could have been a woman, but I didn't hear it clearly enough to say for sure." A murmur ripples through the gallery, quickly silenced by a stern glance from Judge Clara Monroe. Rachel Nguyen scribbles another note, her eyes flicking toward Emily, who remains motionless, her gaze locked on Michael. There's a flicker in her eyes now, a hint of something anger, perhaps, or recognition, but it's gone as quickly as it appeared. Voss steps closer, his voice softening, almost coaxing. "Mr. Torres, you're under oath. You're telling us you heard an argument? A heated one? And you saw nothing? You didn't look out your door? Check the hallway? Michael's hands trembled more noticeably now, and he grips the railing harder, as if anchoring himself. I looked through the peephole, he admits, his voice shaking. After the shouting stopped, I heard a door slam. I looked out and saw someone leaving her apartment. They were moving fast, wearing a dark jacket, hood up. I couldn't
see their face.
The jury exchanges glances, some jotting notes, others staring intently at Michael. Vos preciso, his tone growing sharper. And you're certain you couldn't identify this person? Not even a guess.
Mr. Torres, this is a murder case.
Michael's eyes dart to Emily again, and this time, the contact lingers. Her expression doesn't change, but her fingers, still clasped in her lap, tighten slightly. I don't know. Michael stammers. It was dark, and they were gone before I could get a good look. I swear, that's all I saw. Voss pauses, letting the silence stretch, the weight of Michael's uncertainty hanging in the air. He turns to the jury, his expression one of calculated skepticism. Thank you, Mr. Torres. No further questions at this time. As Voss returns to his seat, Rachel Nugent rises, her movements graceful but deliberate. She adjusts her glasses, her eyes locking onto Michael with a quiet intensity. Mr. Torres, she begins, her voice calm but carrying a subtle challenge. You said the walls were thin. Did you ever hear Ms. Wells argue with anyone else before that night? Michael blinks, caught off guard. The spotlight feels hotter now, and he shifts uncomfortably. Yeah, sometimes, he says, his voice unsteady. She'd have people over. I heard raised voices a few times, but nothing like that night. Rachel nods, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. So, it wasn't unusual for Ms. Wells to have visitors, or arguments. Correct? Michael nods slowly, his shoulders slumping slightly. Yeah, I guess. The camera lingers on Michael's face, the spotlight unforgiving, as Rachel's question hangs in the air, planting a seed of doubt in the jury's minds. Emily's eyes remain fixed on the witness, her expression still a mask, but there's a new tension in her posture, as if she's bracing for what comes next. The Chicago courtroom pulses with a restless energy, the air thick with the weight of Michael Torres' testimony. The fluorescent lights hum softly, casting their unyielding glow over the room as all eyes shift back to Emily Harper at the defendant's table. Her face, until now a fortress of icy composure, begins to crack. The camera zooms in, capturing the subtle shift in her expression. Her lips, once pressed into a tight line, now tremble slightly, and her dark eyes, previously sharp and guarded, softened with a glimmer of moisture. The cold defiance that defined her is unraveling, replaced by something raw, vulnerable, almost human. Prosecutor Daniel Voss stands at his table, flipping through a stack of documents, his voice steady as he addresses the jury. The evidence presented so far paints a clear picture of motive and opportunity, he says, his tone confident, almost triumphant. Ms. Harper was seen leaving the victim's apartment, her fingerprints on the murder weapon, her alibi. At best... He pauses, glancing at Emily, expecting to see her stoic mask intact. Instead, he falters for a moment, caught off guard by the change in her demeanor. Emily's hands, still clasped in her lap, begin to shake, the motion subtle but unmistakable. Her lawyer, Rachel Nguyen, notices immediately, leaning closer to whisper something, her hand resting briefly on Emily's arm. But Emily doesn't respond. Her gaze, no longer fixed on some distant point, drops to the table in front of her, as if the weight of the accusations has finally become too much. A single tear escapes, tracing a slow path down her cheek, catching the light like a prism. The jury notice, their expressions shift in some with pity, others with suspicion, as they try to decipher what this means. The gallery murmurs, a low ripple of sound that Judge Clara Monroe silences with a sharp glance. Order, she says, her voice cutting through the tension. Voss recovers quickly, turning back to the jury, but his rhythm is off, his confidence shaken by the unexpected crack in Emily's facade. The defendant's emotional display changes nothing, he insists, though his words lacked their earlier bite. Guilt can wear many faces. Rachel Nugent rises, her movements calm but deliberate, seizing the moment. Your Honor, may approach the witness stand, she asks, her voice steady, her eyes flicking toward Emily as if to gauge her state. Judge Monroe nods, and Rachel steps forward, her legal pad tucked under her arm. She doesn't address the jury yet. Instead, she turns to Michael Torres, still seated in the witness stand, his own nervousness mirrored in his fidgeting hands. Mr. Torres, Rachel begins, her tone gentle but probing. You mentioned hearing arguments from Ms. Wells' apartment before. Did you ever see anyone else enter or leave her apartment on the night of June 12th, 2024? Besides the figure in the dark jacket. Michael hesitates, his eyes darting toward Emily, then back to Rachel. I don't know, he says, his voice unsteady. It was late, and I only looked out for a second. I told you, I couldn't see their face. Rachel nods, unfazed, and shifts her approach. Let's talk about the shouting you heard. You said Ms. Wells sounded scared and angry. Did you ever hear her mention a name during the argument? Anything specific that stood out? The camera cuts back to Emily, whose tears are now falling, freely, though she makes no sound. Her shoulders tremble, and she presses a hand to her mouth, as if trying to hold back a sob. The change is stark, almost jarring, after her earlier stoicism. The jury watches, some leaning forward, others exchanging glances, as if trying to reconcile this broken figure with the cold-blooded killer Voss described. Michael shifts uncomfortably. In the stand, the spotlight still harsh on his face. I think she said something about you can't keep lying, he says, his voice barely audible. I didn't catch a name, but it sounded personal. Like she knew the person really well. Rachel's eyes narrow slightly, sensing an opening. Personal, she repeats, letting the word linger. So, it's possible Ms. Wells was arguing with someone she had a history with, someone who wasn't Ms. Harper. Voss objects, rising. Quickly. Speculation, Your Honor. The witness has already stated he couldn't identify the other person. Sustained, Judge Monroe says, her tone firm. Ms. Nguyen, keep it to the facts. Rachel nods, undeterred, and turns back to Michael. One last question, Mr. Torres. Did you ever see Ms. Harper and Ms. Wells together before that night? Arguing, talking, anything at all. Michael shakes his head, his voice steadier now. No, I never saw them together. Catherine kept to herself mostly. Rachel returns to her seat, her expression unreadable, but the seed of doubt has been planted. The camera lingers on Emily, her face now streaked with tears, her eyes red but no longer distant. There's a fragility there, but also a spark of something else. Relief, perhaps, or the weight of a secret finally starting to lift. The jury watches her, their notebooks forgotten for a moment, as they grapple with the shift in the woman they've been told is a murderer. The courtroom feels smaller now, the air heavier, as if the truth is beginning to take shape, piece by piece. Emily's tears, silent but undeniable, seem to speak louder than any testimony, hinting at a story far more complex than the one Voss has laid out. The camera pulls back, capturing the tension in the room, the jury's uncertainty, Voss's frustration, Rachel's quiet confidence, and Emily at the center of it all. No longer a statue, but a woman breaking under the weight of something only she knows. The Chicago courtroom buzzes with a suffocating tension, the air thick with the aftershocks of Emily Harper's tear-streaked breakdown. The fluorescent lights cast their unyielding glare, amplifying every movement, every sound. Rachel Nguyen, Emily's lawyer, rises from her seat at the defendant's table, her tailored blazer crisp against the muted chaos of the room. She adjusts her glasses with a deliberate flick, her movements precise, almost predatory. With a slow, measured tap of her fingers on the table, two sharp knocks that echo like gunshots in the silence, she commands the room's attention. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, lock onto prosecutor Daniel Voss, who shifts uncomfortably at his own table, his earlier confidence fraying at the edges. Your Honor, Rachel begins, her voice low but cutting, each word slicing through the heavy air. The defense would like to cross-examine the prosecution's narrative. She steps forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, her gaze never leaving Voss. The jury, still reeling from Emily's emotional display, leans forward, their notebooks momentarily forgotten. Emily herself sits hunched at the table, her face streaked with drying tears, her hands clasped tightly, as if anchoring herself to the moment. Rachel pauses at the center of the courtroom, turning slightly to face the jury, her expression one of controlled intensity. Mr. Voss would have you believe that this case is simple: a woman with a motive, a weapon, and a moment of violence, she says, her tone measured but laced with challenge. But the truth is rarely so neat.
The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is messy. It's layered.
And it's been buried under assumptions. Voss bristles, his fingers tightening around a pen as he leans forward, ready to object. But Rachel presses on, her voice rising just enough to hold the room captive. Let's talk about the timeline, she says, gesturing toward a large chart propped on an easel, displaying the night of June 12, 2024. The prosecution claims Ms. Harper was in Ms. Wells' apartment at the time of the murder, based on a single witness who saw a figure in a dark jacket. A figure, I might add, whose face was never seen. She turns back to Michael Torres, still seated in the witness stand, his nervous energy palpable under the harsh spotlight. Mr. Torres, Rachel says, her tone softening but still probing. You testified that you saw someone leave Ms. Wells' apartment around 11:47 p.m. You said they wore a dark jacket and a hood. Can you confirm whether that person was male or female? Michael shifts, his hands fidgeting on the railing. I couldn't tell, he says, his voice unsteady. It was dark, and they moved fast. I only saw them for a second. Rachel nods, as if expecting this. A second, she repeats, letting the word linger. And yet, the prosecution would have us believe that this fleeting glimpse is enough to pin a murder on my client. She turns to the jury, her eyes scanning their faces. A dark jacket. A hood. In Chicago, in June. That could describe half the city. A faint murmur ripples through the gallery, quickly silenced by Judge Clara Monroe's stern glance. Ms. Nugent, get to your point, the judge says, her voice firm but not unkind. Rachel inclines her head, undeterred. My point, Your Honor, is that the prosecution's case hinges on incomplete evidence and rushed conclusions. She steps closer to the jury, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to lean in. Ms. Harper's fingerprints were on the knife. Yes, but so were other sewn-identified prints, dismissed by the prosecution as irrelevant. Why? Because they don't fit the story they're trying to sell you. Voss shoots to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating and misrepresenting the evidence. Sustained, Judge Monroe says, her eyes narrowing. Ms. Nugent, stick to the testimony. Rachel doesn't flinch. She pivots smoothly, her gaze returning to Voss, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. Let's talk about motive, then, she says, her voice steady but laced with accusation. The prosecution claims Ms. Harper had a personal vendetta against Ms. Wells. Yet, in all their discovery, they've provided no emails, no texts, no witnesses to confirm any animosity between them. Not one. She pauses, letting the silence amplify her words. Curious, isn't it? A murder so personal, yet no trace of a connection. The jury exchanges glances, some scribbling notes, others staring at Rachel with rapt attention. Emily lifts her head slightly, her tear-streaked face now showing a flicker of hope, her eyes locked on her lawyer. Voss grips his pen tighter, his jaw clenched, as if sensing the tide shifting. Rachel steps back to the defendant's table, picking up a single sheet of paper. We will show you, ladies and gentlemen, that the truth is not what the prosecution claims. There are gaps in their story, gaps they don't want you to see. She taps the paper lightly against her hand, her eyes flicking back to Voss, daring him to challenge her. And we will fill those gaps with evidence, not assumptions. The courtroom feels like it's holding its breath. The tension's so thick it's almost tangible. Rachel returns to her seat, her movements calm but deliberate, leaving the jury with a lingering sense of doubt. Emily's hands unclasp for the first time, one reaching to touch Rachel's arm briefly, a silent gesture of gratitude. Voss stares across the room, his earlier swagger replaced by a flicker of unease. The camera lingers on Rachel's face, her sharp eyes glinting with determination, a warrior in the midst of battle, ready to unravel the prosecution's case piece by piece. The Chicago courtroom is a pressure cooker, the air thick with the shock of the security footage still reverberating through the room. The fluorescent lights buzz faintly, casting their cold glow over the restless spectators and the jury, whose eyes dart between the blank screen and the defendant's table. Emily Harper sits rigid, her tear-streaked face now taut with anticipation, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles are white. Rachel Nugent, her lawyer, stands poised at the defense table, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if sensing the next move before it happens. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom creak open, and a ripple of murmurs spreads through the gallery. Two uniformed police officers step through, their boots echoing on the polished floor. Between them is a man, his wrists cuffed, his broad shoulders slightly hunched. The light catches his face unevenly, one side illuminated, the other shrouded in shadow, creating an eerie, almost cinematic effect. His features are sharp high cheekbones, a square jaw, dark eyes that flicker with a mix of defiance and unease. His dark coat, unbuttoned, sways as he's led toward the front of the room. The same kind of coat seen in the grainy security footage. The gallery erupts in whispers, a low roar of shock and curiosity that Judge Clara Monroe quells with a single, sharp bang of her gavel. "Order?" she commands, her voice slicing through the chaos. "Counsel, explain this immediately." Rachel steps forward, her movements calm but deliberate, her legal pad tucked under her arm. "Your Honor," she says, her voice steady and clear. "The defense has requested the presence of this individual, Mr. James Carver, based on new evidence tying him to the scene of Ms. Wells' murder." She gestures toward the man, who now stands near the witness stand, flanked by the officers. His face, half lit by the courtroom's harsh lights, seems to shift between menace and mystery, his expression unreadable. Prosecutor Daniel Voss bolts upright, his face flushed with a mix of confusion and outrage. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," he protests, his voice rising. "The prosecution was not informed of any new witnesses, let alone someone being brought in like this. This is a stunt."
Rachel doesn't flinch, her eyes locking onto
Voss, with a quiet intensity. "Your Honor, Mr. Carver was identified only hours ago, after the defense obtained additional footage and cross-referenced it with police records. His presence is critical to establishing the truth." She pauses, turning to the jury, her voice softening but carrying a weight that commands attention. "This man was in the hallway outside Ms. Wells' apartment minutes after her death. He is the second figure in the video you just saw." The jury gasps, some leaning forward, others scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Emily's eyes widen, her breath catching as she stares at Carver, her expression a mix of recognition and dread. The camera lingers on her face, capturing the way her lips part slightly, as if a memory is clawing its way to the surface. The gallery buzzes again, the whispers growing louder until Judge Monroe raises her hand, silencing them. "Ms. Nugent," the judge says, her tone stern but curious, "you're treading on thin ice. I'll allow Mr. Carver to be questioned, but you'd better have a solid foundation for this." Rachel nods, her lips curving into a faint, confident smile. She steps closer to Carver, who stands motionless, his dark eyes scanning the room before settling on Emily. The light shifts, casting more of his face into shadow, amplifying the sense of mystery around him. "Mr. Carver," Rachel begins, her voice steady but probing, "can you confirm your whereabouts on the night of June 12, 2024, at approximately 11:47 p.m.? Carver's jaw tightens, and he glances at the officers beside him before answering. His voice is low, gravelly, with a hint of defiance. "I was in Lincoln Park," he says, his words measured. "I had business in the area." The vagueness of his response sends another ripple through the courtroom. Voss coughs audibly, shaking his head. But Rachel presses on, undeterred. "Business," she repeats, her tone laced with skepticism. "Can you be more specific? Mr. Carver, were you in the apartment building at 1427 North Houston Street, near Ms. Catherine Wells' residence?" Carver hesitates, his eyes flicking toward Emily again. And for a moment, their gazes lock. The camera catches the exchange, a silent conversation heavy with unspoken history. "I was nearby," he says finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't recall the exact address. The jury exchanges glances, their expressions a mix of intrigue and suspicion. Emily's hands tremble now, her fingers digging into the edge of the table as if to steady herself. Rachel steps closer to Carver, her eyes narrowing. You don't
recall, she says, her voice sharp now.
Yet security footage places you in that hallway, steps from a murder scene. Care to explain why you were there, Mr. Carver? Voss objects again, his voice booming. Your Honor, this is speculative. There's no proof this man was involved. Sustained? Judge Monroe says, her eyes locked on Rachel. Ms. Nugent, you're pushing the limits. Get to a direct question. Rachel nods, unfazed, and turns back to Carver. Did you know Catherine Wells? She asks, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Carver's face twitches, the shadowed half of his expression betraying a flicker of unease. Yeah, he says after a long pause, his voice low. I knew her. The courtroom erupts in gasps, the sound like a wave crashing over the room. Emily's head snaps up, her eyes wide with shock, her tears replaced by a burning intensity. The camera zooms in on Carver's face, the light shifting to reveal more of his features hardened, guarded but with a crack of vulnerability. The mystery of his presence looms larger, a shadow cast over the prosecution's case, as the jury and spectators hang on for what comes next. The Chicago courtroom vibrates with a taut silence, the aftermath of Rachel Nugent's sharp cross-examination still hanging in the air. The fluorescent lights hum faintly, casting their sterile glow over the polished benches and tense faces. All eyes are on the large screen mounted at the front of the room, its blank surface looming like a silent judge. Rachel stands near the defense table, her posture calm but commanding, holding a small remote in her hand. She glances at Judge Clara Monroe, who nods slightly, granting permission to proceed. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Rachel says, her voice steady but carrying a quiet intensity. The defense would like to present new evidence, sir. Security video from the Lincoln Park apartment building, obtained just this morning. She pauses, letting the weight of her words settle, her eyes sweeping over the jury. Prosecutor Daniel Voss stiffens at his table, his fingers twitching around. A pen! His earlier confidence now tinged with wariness. Rachel presses a button on the remote, and the screen flickers to life. A grainy black and white image appears, time-stamped June 12, 2024, Jam 11:45 p.m. It's the hallway outside Catherine Wells' apartment, captured by the building's security camera. The camera angle is high, showing the narrow corridor with its peeling paint and flickering overhead light. The jury leans forward, their eyes glued to the screen, as a collective hush falls over the courtroom. The video begins with an empty hallway, the only sound the faint buzz of the fluorescent bulb. Then, a figure appears, moving quickly toward Catherine's apartment door. They wear a dark jacket, the hood pulled up, obscuring their face, just as Michael Torres described. The figure pauses at the door, their movements hurried, almost frantic, before slipping inside. The timestamp reads, 11:43 p.m. A murmur ripples through the gallery, quickly silenced by Judge Monroe's sharp glance. The video fast-forwards slightly. The timestamp now 11:47 p.m. The door swings open, and the same hooded figure emerges, moving faster now, their head down as they stride toward the stairwell at the end of the hall. But then, something unexpected happens. The camera catches a second figure stepping out of the shadows near the stairwell, their face partially visible under the flickering light. It's a man, his features sharp but blurred by the low-resolution, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat but no hood. He glances toward Catherine's door, his expression unreadable, before turning and disappearing down the stairs. A gasp erupts from the gallery, loud and unrestrained, as spectators whisper frantically to one another. The jury exchanges startled glances, some scribbling furiously in their notebooks, others staring at the screen as if it might reveal more. Emily Harper, seated at the defendant's table, lifts her head, her tear-streaked face now etched with a mix of shock and hope. Her hands, trembling slightly, grip the edge of the table as she stares at the frozen image of the second figure. Voss leaps to his feet, his voice sharp with indignation. Objection! Your Honor, this video was not disclosed during discovery. The prosecution had no prior access to this evidence. Rachel turns to face him, her expression calm but unyielding. Your Honor, this footage was only recovered this morning from a secondary camera system in the building, one the prosecution's investigators overlooked. The defense has every right to present it under the rules of newly discovered evidence. Judge Monroe leans forward, her eyes narrowing as she considers the argument. The courtroom feels like it's holding its breath. The tension so thick, it's almost palpable. I'll allow it, she says finally, her voice firm. But Ms. Nugent, you will provide the prosecution with full access to this footage immediately after this session. Rachel nods, her lips curving into a faint, controlled smile. She turns back to the jury, gesturing toward the screen. This video raises critical questions, she says, her voice steady but forceful. Who is this second person? Why were they in the hallway just minutes after the murder? And why did the prosecution's investigation fail to mention them? She pauses, letting her words sink in. The presence of this individual suggests that Ms. Harper was not the only person near Ms. Wells' apartment that night. It suggests someone else had the opportunity and, perhaps, the motive. The camera pans across the jury, capturing their wide-eyed expressions, some nodding slightly, others whispering to their neighbors. Voss sits back down, his face flushed, his fingers drumming on the table as he struggles to regain his composure. Emily's eyes remain fixed on the screen, her breathing shallow, as if the image of that second figure has unlocked something inside her. Rachel steps closer to the jury, her voice dropping to a near whisper. This is not a case of certainty, as the prosecution claims. This is a case of doubt, treasonable doubt. And this video is just the beginning. She clicks the remote, and the screen goes dark, leaving the courtroom in a stunned silence. The image of the mysterious second figure burned into everyone's minds. The Chicago courtroom is a crucible of raw emotion, the air thick with the aftershock of James Carver's faltering testimony. The fluorescent lights buzz faintly, their harsh glow illuminating the strained faces of the jury, the restless gallery, and the tense figures at the center of it all. The camera pans slowly, settling on Emily Harper at the defendant's table, her face now the focal point of the room. The lens zooms in, closing in on her eyes dark, glistening, no longer cold or guarded but alive with a fragile, radiant relief. Tears stream down her cheeks, tracing glistening paths over her pale skin, catching the light like fragile prisms. Her lips tremble, but there's a softness in her gaze, a release, as if a crushing weight has finally begun to lift. Rachel Nugent stands at the front of the courtroom, her posture steady, her legal pad clutched in one hand as she addresses the jury with a voice that carries both conviction and quiet triumph. Ladies and gentlemen, she says, her eyes sweeping over their rapt faces. The evidence we've presented, the security footage, Mr. Carver's presence, his connection to Ms. Wells points to a truth the prosecution has ignored. Emily Harper is not the murderer. She was a scapegoat, caught in a web of someone else's making. The camera cuts briefly to James Carver, still standing near the witness stand, his face half-shadowed, his jaw tight with unease, his dark eyes flicker toward Emily. And for a moment, the weight of their shared history hangs in the air, unspoken but palpable. The jury watches him, their expressions a mix of suspicion and curiosity, their notebooks forgotten as they lean forward, hanging on Rachel's every word. Prosecutor Daniel Voss sits at his table, his earlier confidence shattered, his scattered papers now hastily gathered but crumpled in his hands. He stares at the floor, his face flushed, as if grappling with the unraveling of his case. Rachel turns to face him, her voice sharpening. The prosecution built their case on assumptions on fingerprints that could belong to anyone, on a witness who saw a shadow, not a face. But the truth is clearer now. Mr. Carver was in that hallway. Mr. Carver knew Catherine Wells, and Mr. Carver had a motive. She pauses, letting the words sink in, then turns back to the jury. The defense has uncovered records admitted to the court this morning showing that Ms. Wells was involved in a real estate deal gone wrong, one that threatened to expose Mr. Carver's fraudulent practices. She had evidence, documents, she planned to take to the authorities. And on the night of June 12, 2024, She paid for that knowledge with her life. The gallery erupts in gasps, the sound like a wave crashing over the room. Judge Clara Monroe bangs her gavel, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Order!" she commands, her eyes flashing. "Miss Nugent, conclude your statement." Rachel nods, stepping closer to the jury, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to lean in. Emily Harper was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her fingerprints were on the knife because she visited Ms. Wells earlier that evening as a friend, not a killer. She was leaving when the real murderer arrived. And that man, she points toward Carver, her gesture sharp and unwavering, is standing before you now. The camera swings back to Emily, her eyes still filling the frame. The tears flow freely now, but they're different, not tears of despair, but of vindication. Her hands, no longer clenched, rest loosely in her lap, her shoulders relaxing as if a chain has been broken. The relief in her gaze is almost tangible, a light breaking through the storm that's consumed her for months. She blinks, and another tear falls, but her lips curve into the faintest hint of a smile, a silent acknowledgement of the truth finally emerging. Carver shifts uncomfortably, his shadowed face betraying a crack in his composure. His hands, still cuffed, flex slightly, and his eyes dart toward the exit, as if calculating an escape that isn't there. The jury watches him, their expressions hardening, the seeds of doubt now fully bloomed into suspicion. Voss, defeated, slumps in his chair, his hands covering his face as the weight of Rachel's words dismantles his case. Rachel returns to the defense table, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "The truth is not always easy to uncover," she says to the jury, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "But it is here, in this courtroom, in that footage, in Mr. Carver's own words. Emily Harper is innocent. And we trust you too. See that?" The camera lingers on Emily's face, her eyes still glistening, now reflecting not just relief but a quiet strength. The courtroom feels smaller, the air lighter, as if the truth has carved out space where only accusation once stood. The jury exchanges glances, some nodding slightly, others staring at Carver with newfound scrutiny. The gallery whispers, the sound a low hum of awe and disbelief. As Judge Monroe calls for a recess, her gavel echoing like a final note in the symphony of revelation. Emily's eyes close for a moment, her tears still falling, but her breathing The camera pulls back, capturing the weight of the moment, the juror's contemplation. Ka ba suaru, ne subosu esu defi. And Rachel's quiet trance. The truth, at last, is laid bare. And Emily Harper, no longer a defendant but a woman reclaimed, sits at the heart of it all. The Chicago courtroom is a cauldron of tension, the air crackling with the weight of James Carver's admission. The fluorescent lights hum relentlessly, casting stark shadows across the polished wood and strained faces. All eyes are on Carver. Standing near the witness stand, his half-lit face a mask of guarded defiance, his dark coat hanging loosely on his frame, Emily Harper, at the defendant's table, grips the edge of her chair, her eyes wide, a mix of fear and anticipation flickering in her terror-dimmed gaze. Rachel Nugent, her lawyer, stands poised, her sharp eyes gleaming with the confidence of someone who's just turned the tide. Prosecutor Doniel Vaz, usually so composed, is visibly unraveling. His face, flushed with shock, betrays a rare moment of vulnerability as he stares at Carver, his hands clutching a stack of documents that tremble slightly. The courtroom's silence is shattered when Rachel's voice cuts through, calm but relentless. "Mr. Carver," she says, stepping forward, her heels clicking softly on the floor. "You've just confirmed you knew Catherine Wells. Can you tell the court the nature of your relationship with her?" Carver shifts, his eyes darting briefly to Emily before returning to Rachel. The light catches the hard lines of his face, accentuating the shadow that obscures half his expression. "We were business associates," he says, his voice low and careful, each word chosen with precision. "We worked on a few projects together. Real estate deals? Mostly." The jury leans forward, their notebooks open but forgotten, their attention riveted on Carver's cryptic response. Rachel raises an eyebrow, her tone sharpening. "Real estate deals?" she repeats, letting the words hang in the air. "Interesting. And were these deals contentious? Did they ever lead to Arguments. Perhaps the kind of argument Mr. Torres overheard on the night of June 12, 2024. Voss lurches to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Objection, Your Honor, he shouts, his voice cracking with urgency. This is speculative and irrelevant. The witness's business dealings have no bearing on the defendant's. Guilt? His hands fumble, and the stack of documents slips from his grasp, papers fluttering to the ground like scattered leaves. The gallery gasps, the sound sharp and collective, as Voss scrambled to gather them, his face now a deep crimson. Judge Clara Munro's eyes narrow, her gavel poised but unused. Overruled, she says, her voice firm but measured. 미승기엔. Proceed, but keep it relevant. Rachel nods, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. She steps closer to Carver, her gaze unyielding. Mr. Carver, were you in Ms. Wells' apartment that night? Did you argue with her? And, more importantly, did you have any reason to want her silenced? The courtroom erupts in murmurs, the spectators unable to contain their shock. Emily's breath catches, her hands tightening on the table as she stares at Carver, her expression, a storm of emotions, hope, dread, and something deeper, something personal. Carver's jaw clenches, his eyes narrowing as he meets Rachel's stare. I wasn't in her apartment, he says, his voice steady but strained. I was in the building, yeah, but not with her. I was checking on a property nearby. Rachel doesn't miss a beat. Checking on a property, she says, her tone dripping with skepticism. At 11:47 p.m., in the same hallway where a woman was murdered minutes earlier, she turns to the jury, her voice rising slightly, each word a hammer striking doubt into the prosecution's case. Mr. Carver's presence in that hallway, captured on camera, was no coincidence. His vague answers, his connection to Ms. Wells, these are not the actions of an innocent bystander. Voss, still crouched to retrieve his scattered papers, rises abruptly, his tie askew, his composure shattered. Your Honor, this is a circus, he snaps, his voice louder than intended. The defense is fabricating a narrative with no evidence to support it. His hands gesture wildly, a stray paper still clinging to his sleeve, amplifying his disarray. Judge Munro bangs her gavel, the sound sharp and final. Mr. Voss, control yourself, she warns, her eyes flashing. Ms. Nugent, you have one more question before I call a recess. Rachel nods, turning back to Carver, her eyes boring into him. Mr. Carver, she says, her voice low but piercing, did Catherine Wells ever threaten to expose something about you, something that could ruin your business, your reputation, or your life? The question lands like a thunderclap. Carver's face twitches, the shadowed half of his expression betraying a flicker of fear. He opens his mouth to respond, but no words come. The silence stretches, heavy and suffocating, as the jury watches, their eyes wide with anticipation. Emily's gaze locks onto Carver, her breathing shallow, as if she's waiting for a truth she's known all along. The gallery is a sea of whispers. The tension so thick it feels like the room might crack under its weight. Voss, now standing, grips the edge of his table, his scattered papers forgotten, his eyes darting between Carver and Rachel. The camera pans across the courtroom, capturing the jury's rapt attention, Emily's trembling hope, and Carver's guarded silence. The tide has turned, and the truth, whatever it is, feels closer than ever, teetering on the edge of revelation. As the dust settles in the courtroom of reverse trial, Emily Harper's story leaves us with more than a verdict. It leaves us with lessons that resonate far beyond the gavel's echo. This isn't just a tale of justice. It's a call to look deeper, to fight harder, to hold fast when the world seems stacked against you. First, we learn the power of persistence. Emily's truth was nearly lost under a tide of accusations, but Rachel Newton's relentless pursuit brought it to light. It's a reminder that truth often hides behind assumptions, waiting for someone to keep pushing. In our lives, how many times do we accept the easy answer? Persistence can uncover what others miss. Then, there's the strength of reasonable doubt. A single security video, a shadowed figure, flipped this case on its head. Doubt isn't weakness, it's a tool for fairness, urging us to question what seems certain. whether in a courtroom or our daily choices. Pausing to challenge the narrative can lead us closer to what's right. We also see that appearances deceive. Emily's icy facade hid a heart heavy with fear. The prosecution's confidence masked a fragile case. This teaches us to look beyond first impressions, to seek the full story before we judge a person or a moment. Emily's courage under scrutiny shines through. Her tears weren't defeat but a testament to resilience, proof that strength endures even in vulnerability. It's a lesson for us all. When the pressure mounts, holding on takes courage, and hope can carry us through. Finally, facts triumph over feeling. The courtroom was a storm of emotions, but it was evidence, fingerprints, connections, that set Emily free. In our own lives, grounding decisions in truth, not just passion, leads to clarity. Reverse trial challenges us to seek truth, embrace doubt, and stand resilient. What will you carry forward? Share below, and let's keep the conversation alive.